Hello there. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Welcome to Identity Hoodoo Voodoo on Google Developers Live. I'm Tim Bray. I'm with the Identity Group here at Google, and today with me I have Naveen Agarwal, who's a tech lead manager, something important here in the group, and he's been doing identity stuff for at least 100 years. Naveen, give us some highlights.
100 years. Well, if you include all the team members and so on, definitely we've been doing this for 100 years. So I've been at Google for 2 years. Before that, roughly for 9 years, I was managing the identity team at Yahoo, where we did OpenID launch, a lot of things which were completely unknown, browser-based auth, and the OAuth 1 extension, for example, which was Yahoo's extension, which essentially became OAuth 2 for the web flows and so on. On Google side, in the last few years, 2 years, we've been making things much easier, trying to integrate seamlessly into different platforms, and making the experience overall much easier, and make things better for our users, and allow them to share and do what they want to do.
So increasingly, a lot of our users are on mobile devices, and that's what I want us to talk about today. Mobile devices are super important because in lots of parts of the world that's the only way onto the internet, and even in this part of the world, an increasing proportion of time is on mobile devices, and passwords already suck, and on mobile devices, the whole identity thing can be very painful. So what can we tell developers right now today?
I think, yeah, you're right. We understand the identity issues are, not that easy on the mobile devices. Almost all the flows which have been developed, they were based on the browser. They were assuming that the user was in a browser, the bigger approval pages and so on. So we are trying to make the experience much better, and we have actually been able to do a lot on the Android side. And you actually log in once, and you don't really have to enter password second time. It's very rare even that you have to enter a password. And we have found it's much easier to do all these because there is a different security properties. Users, hold the phones next to them. You're not sharing a phone a lot. And so there are some nicer things which come with the phone. So you can actually log the user, and they have an expectation, and they don't want to sign out. In the desktop, people do sign out. And again, the protocols were written assuming the browser. So they do not really fall nicely into the Android and the iOS operating systems. But we have been making nicer changes. And in Android, if you look at the OAuth 2 implementation we have, it has nothing about OAuth 2. Developer doesn't have to understand OAuth 2. You just make a call to the account manager and say, hey, give me a token for these scopes. And you get a token, and you can use it.
Okay, so well, that's the good news, but there's that other operating system, and you mentioned it. Many of our folks use Apples,
right.
Use iPhones and iPads and so on, and we're still struggling a little bit harder on there. In fact, I know people who have iOS devices complain at me about specifically the Google apps and having to sign in all the time. So what are we doing about that?
Yeah, I think it is hard, given that it requires support from the operating system. All our apps require user to sign in if you basically have personalized experience, and essentially you have to enter ID and password in each and every app, which is really painful for a user. And imagine if you are a two-factor user, you have to enter ID, password, and an OTP in every app. So,
and you should be a two-factor user. If you're not, get on that. Sorry.
Yes. No, I think that's a very good point. There is no reason, if you have anything valuable in your account, any email coming in, you should actually sign up for two-factor. But given that, that's basically very hard. We definitely want to have the single sign-on work fairly easily between all the apps, and we are working on that part. So, stay tuned. But I think the developers have even a harder time, even on the iOS. So we have been actually looking at some of the options to make life easier for developers to get OAuth token, given that on iOS you don't have background apps, you cannot talk to them in the background, so it's much harder basically to do.
So have we got anything specific we can talk about right now?
Right. So on the iOS, currently there are a couple of options if you wanted to get a OAuth token for Google APIs. One is which is the Google Plus SDK. And which is actually very easy. One of the best part is if the user is signed into the Google Plus app, You ask for a token, he's going to see an approval page, no password entry, and user says yes, you get a code back, and basically it's a permanent code, you can store it.
But lots of people don't have that app. So
Right. So but the good part is G+ SDK actually will default back to the native browser, Safari browser. And so if the app doesn't exist, it'll actually send the user to the browser. And again, if the user has to just sign in once into Google in the browser, and they will see an approval page, and they'll click on the approval page and basically go back to the app, which is a very nice, smooth experience. You could actually do this. Now we have recently enabled. You could actually make a call directly sent to the browser without using the G+ SDK if there are certain things which you may need, which is not there for the through the G+ SDK.
So this has been working, but we haven't been talking about it very much yet.
Right. We haven't talked about this, but it is actually now live. You could actually try it out. And I do have an app, if you want to see the experience, where you could actually send the user to the Safari browser. If they are signed into Google, they would just see an approval page. User says yes, and they will get the code back to your app, and you're signed in.
Shall we be brave and try for a live demo?
We could try. We could give it a try and see how it works.
So let's switch over to the iPad there.
Right.
Yep.
So
It's okay. It's okay. Stay
So
over
I have an app here, which actually has sign into Google. If I click on it, you can see it goes to the Safari. I was signed into Safari. I see an approval page, and if I say allow access, smoothly it goes back to the app, and app has access to the data, and it actually can fetch whatever it needs, basically.
Can you do that one more time, Naveen? We're not getting it. Give me
Sure.
1 second. All right.
Okay, do it. Let's do
Okay.
it.
Do it again.
So here we have the app, which basically has sign into Google. You click on sign in. It sends you back to the browser, where I'm signed into a browser. I click, see an approval page. It's asking for some of the basic information about my Google account. I say allow access. The code is sent back to the app, and app can use that access token to actually fetch the data. So it's a pretty smooth experience, actually, to make it work. So you could
Oops.
okay, I dropped the mic.
That happened last time I did this too.
Do it live.
Yes. All right.
Okay,
I'll hold the
fair
mic
enough.
here. So the other options are, which actually currently people use, are using embedded web view. And there was no easier option for our developers on iOS. And the embedded web views work nicely from a user experience, but actually one of the biggest drawback is user has to enter ID and password in each and every app, which is really painful. I hate entering passwords on my mobile devices, even though it's easier to type them in, but depending on how many characters and numbers I have, it's very hard. So generally, embedded view might look good. People generally like them using our GTM OAuth2 library, but they definitely are not the best experience from a user point of view, because they have to keep entering the ID and password again and again.
So after we decided to do this talk, Naveen actually published a few slides on what you actually have to do as an iOS developer to make this happen. Could we switch to the Chromebook just for a sec there, Dylan? They're linked from from Naveen's Google Plus page and my Google Plus page. So if you just go to Google Plus and type Tim Breyer, Naveen Agarwal, you'll find a link to this thing. And there's this trick where you actually register a callback URI where the scheme identifies your app by either bundle or client ID.
Right. So in order to support so essentially what we did not have a way for the app to get back to from a browser to get back to the app. And by the way, this works not just in Safari or iOS, it works in other operating systems for the native apps. What we are supporting now is that we will redirect back. If your app is a native app or installed app, we would redirect back to one of the custom URL which you provide. Custom URL could be a bundle ID on iOS. So for example, you can see com.example.myapp, and you need to provide that bundle ID to us when you register the client ID. or in cases on some operating system where you don't have bundle ID or anything else, you could just use the reverse of your client ID as the custom URL. So you can see in this one, client ID is 1234-abc.apps.googleusercontent.com. We would basically select one of them. You can pass that as a redirect URI in the call to the browser, and if all this matches out, we will redirect back after the approval.
So that's up there now. We eventually will roll this out into the regular documentation suite, but it's there and it's working, and you're encouraged to go
Right.
to go ahead and give it a try. Okay, so let's go back to Android for a second, where everything's sort of built in and easy for us. We've been working on basically minimizing the approvals.
Yes. Yeah, I think one of the thing when we started with OAuth or even with OpenID, we were very approval page trigger happy, what I would call it basically. Putting lots of stuff on the approval pages, trying to make sure that user is very well aware of. What it basically has created is that user may click on approval page without even thinking about it, or they are seeing the approval pages very often and they may not, they don't understand what's going on. So we are trying to minimize the number of times we show user approval pages, or where it does not, it's not really needed, and we can actually infer that user is actually trying to do the right thing. And one of the things which we did recently on Android was where the user is trying to get an ID token to log into their own web server. Essentially, if the user has selected an email address from the account manager, that he's saying, yes, I want to actually use this account to log in. There is no approval page, and we give out an ID token, which essentially gets you access to an ID token and also their public Google profile information to the user.
I mean, basically what we're trying to do is to ask the user for permission only when it's reasonable and
Right.
it's worthy of their attention. So if I'm using some developer's Android app, if I also want to identify myself to their backend, I shouldn't have to ask for permission again.
Right.
And I should do that. So we've been making some.
So I think just to also clarify, we have also done this on the web. So in certain flows, if you know the user's email address, and if you pass that email address to our auth endpoint, and if you are only requesting an email scope, we would actually not show an approval page if the user is signed in, and we'll send you back an ID token, which you can verify that the user is signed in. So you could use that to actually verify user's email address without sending them an email. You could actually do that fairly easily because the user had entered the email address on your site, and you redirect back. So there are lots of good use cases you will see in the future we may be enabling.
Yeah, so I mean, identity on the internet is, the internet's huge, and the identity problem on the internet is huge. It feels sometimes like we're facing this incredibly tall mountain in the Himalayas, but we are inching up, and the idea is to keep people safe and secure and not pester them all the time,
Right.
because that's part of security as well. So we're running a little bit long here. Dylan, unless there's somebody online with a question, I think we should maybe call it a day, and we're good? Fair enough. So thanks for dropping in and listening, and we'll be doing these on a regular basis, so come back for more identity, good news, and nastiness as well on Google Developers Live. Thank you kindly.
Thank you.